My English name is Evan Fowler, and my given Chinese name is 方禮倫. I was born in Hong Kong. I was born there, raised there. My family are from Hong Kong, so I'm Eurasian. I'm mixed. My family have treated Hong Kong as their homes. It's nice having a little bit of sound in the background, and of course, there's the news and there's lots of other shows that we do listen. BBC Radio is much better than BBC TV. Much better. Rollo, you've eaten your breakfast already, so it's not for you. Not for you. You're having a look, I know, aren't you? I went through the international school system in Hong Kong, but I was a bit different to many of my classmates because, on the one hand, I had perhaps a鬼佬face, but then the way I related to Hong Kong was very different. So, for I think many expatriates, they loved Hong Kong as a place that they choose to live. And for me, Hong Kong was my home, it was my parents' home, but it was also my grandparents' home, it was my great-grandparents' home. I didn't have another place to relate to as a home. And for me, until very recently, Hong Kong was the only home I knew. What was special about Hong Kong was that all the people who became Hong Kongers, who called Hong Kong their home, it wasn't because you necessarily had long, deep roots in the city, but it was because you chose to lay your roots there.
Was there any precious moment you want to share? When you lived in Hong Kong?
Moments. Oh yeah. There are so many moments, I think, that to me are so special about Hong Kong. So I grew up in Hong Kong, sort of mostly in the New Territories. So when I was young, I originally was sort of living on the Tai Po Road, and I'd spend some of my time there, and then also some of my time in those days sort of in mid-levels as well. The funny things was getting into taxis in Hong Kong. When I was young, I would get into a taxi, and this was sort of before 97, so when I was still at school in Hong Kong, and you'd get into the taxi and you'd tell the taxi driver where you wanted to go, and then he'd be like, 你識講中文咯, and I was like, 係有少少咯, 我媽咪係中國人. Sort of growing up before 97, a lot of those type of conversations were revolved around not so much that, you're not a Hong Konger, but it was like, you're a certain type of Hong Konger, but you're still a Hong Konger, you're still very much part of our community. And then I did notice, sadly, from 97 onwards, there was increasingly I had conversations when people said to me, they said, yes, but where are your parents from? And, I would say, they're from Hong Kong. And they would say, no, where was your mother born? And I would say, Hong Kong lo. Where was your grandparents born? Hong Kong lo. No, but where did they come from? I don't know why that's happened. There's probably a multitude of reasons for it, but I certainly sort of felt that change. One of the things which I found actually most hurtful, so in Hong Kong, one of the people I was most close to was my godfather. And, my godfather comes from a Chinese family, sort of a Chinese, factory owning, industrialist family. And I'd always felt, having known him almost all my life, because of recent developments in Hong Kong, I received some communications from him, after having moved to the UK, when he kept insisting on referring to me having gone back to my home. And, I would reply and say, outside of being a student, I'd never lived in the UK. He knows that, but, suddenly now it's almost as though, he was choosing decide who I was and decide my right to identify with a Hong Kong. But the only way I can think of that is to say that, Hong Kong as a place has changed a lot. It is no longer the society that I remember, and it is no longer the type of place where I sort of felt was my home. I'm very, very worried coming from as a Eurasian, hearing within my family that suddenly now, Eurasians, or some Eurasians who've been in Hong Kong for a long time, are saying, in this new Hong Kong, can we ever be Chinese enough? That to me, it's a little worrying. Even in colonial times, families wouldn't sit there and say, can we ever be white enough for the English? Or can we ever be English enough? Many big Eurasian families have done that, where, one brother has embraced his Chinese identity, another has embraced a Western identity. But I don't think there was ever a discussion, certainly not in my lifetime, when that issue of their race being connected to their right to be seen as belonging in Hong Kong, truly belonging, not just tolerated guests, was being had.
So how do you identify the terms of Hong Kong?
The way we identify is a very personal choice. So, our identity doesn't come from a state. We are now in England, in Britain. The British government doesn't say, because of that, you are British. And to be British, you must love Boris Johnson and the Conservative Party, or, the King, or whatever. What it means to be a Hong Konger is very much defined, I think, by the individual. And it's defined by the way they relate to Hong Kong, the way they relate to other people in Hong Kong. I think the Hong Kong identity is tied to, I guess, sort of social culture. It's tied to shared experience, also sort of tied to values, to the things that I think, because of those shared experience, most Hong Kong people, if not sort of all Hong Kong people, value. At its core, it is something that is very personal. One thing I really liked in Hong Kong was, being able to go and having like my favourite was always a Tang Dai Jok. So you go and have a jok in the morning, or having. But the thing is, even if you make the jok, it's not the same as if you go and buy it in a shop in Hong Kong, because when they do it properly, it's like being sort of stewing away for a long time, and it's got that sort of thickness and that. It's really nice. So even when you cook it yourself, it's not quite the same. So I do find in the UK we tend to have like a Western breakfast. Not Lupac. No,
Not Lupac.
This is the first one. So it's, for me, that's always been lemon and sugar, or banana. Occasionally, I went through a phase when I liked Nutella, but Nutella can be a bit luxurious at times. Those are the two flavours I would have growing up, because certainly in the 1980s and early 1990s in Hong Kong, Nutella was not something that was easy to get. So it was always banana or lemon and sugar. Just let that cook, and then get to flip it in a minute, which is fun. So toss it, and then it's the way. This one's not so perfect cut that photo, but there we go. Squeeze some lemon on it. Load this up. Fold it over, and that's it. And this one, which we've done, fold it over. It's unrolling a bit, but anyway. So those should be down here. I'll do the same thing.
Hong Kong is your birthplace and your home, of course, but eventually you left it and staying in UK. How do you feel?
I was extremely unhappy to leave. So I think perhaps like many Hong Kongers who have moved or who've left Hong Kong in recent years, the reason to leave wasn't because of a pull factor. It wasn't because I really wanted to live in the UK, and it was because I felt there were things happening in Hong Kong that were impacting on me directly, that made me feel unwelcome and made me feel that it was perhaps good to at least sort of look at the possibilities of trying to lay down roots somewhere else. I thought it would be much more difficult moving. I felt perhaps if I moved to the UK outside of London, you had this feeling that people are going to be very not very sophisticated. They're going to be very English. They don't really know very much about the world. And I was coming to the UK also with a lot of prejudice, which turned out to be really not founded at all. The truth was the UK was far more sort of welcoming and actually far more open, far more connected as well to Hong Kong than I realised. Actually, I will say the majority of my neighbours and the people around here who I've spoken to have had either a direct or indirect connection with Hong Kong. Many people who have spent time in Hong Kong, who know Hong Kong, who continue to have interests in Hong Kong. So coming to the UK, I found it actually very easy to connect with many people in the UK who have that shared memory. So when I say, I was a child growing up in 1980s in Hong Kong, and do you remember going to, Yucca de Lac, and do you remember, sort of sitting up there, and the time when the jockey club was being built in Sha Tin, and how you could overlook it, and going to sort of other places, or going to Dai Wai and having pigeon and things. You'd be surprised, actually, there's a lot of people here who had that same experience because they may have been in Hong Kong for a few years at that time. There's a lot of small little things about the UK which I found very comforting. Little things like the traffic signals. There's a certain way of presenting and doing things, which of course, because of British colonial times, Hong Kong also adopted. It's surprising when you're going around and you notice these little things which just make you feel as though where you are is not quite so alien. I don't think I felt sort of relieved, but it certainly made it easier for me to settle. My wife is 100% ethnically Chinese. When we moved here, my wife would always get lots of people who would come over and say, are you okay? How's it been settling? Is everything okay? They never talked to me. I think there was a sort of assumption that you're sort of English enough or British enough, everything will be fine. And I did remember like a couple of times, sort of talking with my wife and sort of saying, there's a couple of times when you really sort of feel a bit homesick and things. And I do tell her, I just sort of say, I do think it's kind of not fair, because it would be really nice if someone just came over. I'm also moving to a new country, and they would view me immediately as being, I suppose, not only British, but they would sort of view me as being someone who's much more acclimatized culturally. No, but there's still so much that you still kind of miss. And for example, one of the things we really miss about Hong Kong is certainly living in Cambridgeshire, which is very flat, is the geography of Hong Kong, or the mountains or the sea. It's the sound of the sea. We like to go to the seaside here simply to hear the sea. But obviously it's not the same as in Hong Kong. But when you grow up and you always have those things around you, I think being able to kind of see and hear them, it does feel reassuring. Many people, again, they sort of, it's very easy to sort of overlook some of us Eurasians as presuming that settling in is very easy, or we are already home.
So it's a stereotype, right?
It's a stereotype. Oh, there you go. Where's your case? Okay, good boy. Good boy. My interest in Hong Kong and my interest in China, also my interest in sort of understanding the dynamics of the British imperial policy, and because I felt that it was a way to better understand my own roots, and it was to better understand who I am, the foundations of the society that I call home. But for me, what I'm doing now is I'm sort of dividing my time between, I think, continuing to write. Hello, quiet. So what I'm doing now is I'm dividing my time between continuing to do some writing. So I am working on sort of another book. The difficulty, of course, at the moment is, how do you write a book which provides a lot of personal insight into Hong Kong without potentially endangering people, sadly. And how much can you actually write and say that it's not to say the Hong Kong government is a totalitarian dictatorship that will come in and hit people. It's the fact that a lot of people are very concerned, and a lot of people are very worried about how certain things may reflect on them. So even if you were to write and you were to mention certain people and conversations you'd have with other people who provided some insight, you don't know how those people would feel about you writing about it. So I am doing that. I'm continuing to do some research and also writing around Hong Kong. But the other thing I'm doing is I really want to help in in different ways people who are coming over from Hong Kong. So I've been very lucky to, I think, sort of meet some very experienced and capable people. Together with them, we've set up a company to build a marketplace for UK companies. So for the buying and selling of UK companies, and also around that sort of business services and a online sort of community for people who are business minded. But critically, from a Hong Kong perspective, we also feel that for a lot of Hong Kongers coming to the UK, one of their big concerns, the big worries is, if I'm going to come to the UK, what am I going to do? How am I going to live? How am I going to get by? And there may be business opportunities as well for people to come over and to either buy a business and run their own business here, or to get into partnership with a British partner, or to partner with other Hong Kongers who are coming over to take on a business and evolve that business. And I think Hong Kongers have a huge advantage. I think by coming to the UK, they're providing a very fresh new perspective when it comes to thinking Certain types of sort of high street operations may maybe change, how to evolve a business to create greater value, simply because they're coming to a new economy, they're looking at a market afresh and anew. Very, very few businesses are built by one person. It's always a team that you can pull together. So we have a function called Team Up, which is really about the sort of business networking in a way. And that's all about, getting people who may have sort of ideas and allowing them to find people who may have the skills to execute on those ideas, and also perhaps finding people who may have some of the capital, all the network to be able to bring it all together. Just imagine if you have like a Junji Lai Cha place there, or just imagine if you take on this Chinese takeaway and you take it on and you actually turn it into a place just focusing on Silyo. People here would love it.
One last question. Speaking about Hong Kongers fleeing Hong Kong, do you have any words to them?
Well, I think what I would say is that the UK is not a perfect society. The UK is also it's a very diverse society. It's a diverse country. Don't worry about sort of not being welcomed here. Don't worry about sort of issues like, I think, racism, because I know there's a lot of that's being sort of pushed out, I think, by the media in Hong Kong for certain reasons. That's not to say that life is easy, and that's not to say that there is no racism. I mean, in every society there is. Remember that Britain, like Hong Kong, Britain is an island that is made up of refugees. There are so many people who came to Britain to escape, what the communists were doing in Eastern Europe, to escape what the Nazis were doing, to escape pogroms. Britain is a place where a lot of people who've been persecuted fled to, because in Britain they knew they could be free and they knew that their basic rights would be protected and respected. So Hong Kongers, when you come, you will be joining a community of people, many of whom, they may not say it to you when you first meet them, but many of whom actually share a similar background. In the past, Britain has been a place that has welcomed those people, and it has been a place that has allowed what it means to be British to be shaped by that. And in the future, it will be the same too. So don't worry about that.